Hello, podcasters, wannabe podcasters, those that shape the minds of others. Welcome to this fun-filled monthly webinar where we walk you through getting up and going on Libsyn. My name is Dave Jackson. I'm the head of podcaster education here at Libsyn. I'm so glad you're here. We're going to have fun today. I know webinars sometimes are like, no, we're going to have fun today. And before we get to the fun, I have some important stuff. You know why it's important? Because I wrote it down. It's right here. So if you haven't already, have you gone to our YouTube channel? It's amazing. And I don't say that because, it's literally amazing. We have a great thing coming up in December. It's our favorite podcast things in 2023. And first of all, our one and only Brian Connington is there. I call him Brian the video guy because he's Brian the video guy. And Rob Walsh and Elsie Escobar from the feed, and some guy named Dave Jackson is going to be there as well. And if you're like, okay, December 7th, no, you don't have to remember that date. All you have to do is go to our YouTube channel. And you know the drill. You go over to YouTube, right? youtube.com/Libsyn. You click on the subscribe button, and then you smash the bell. Now, if that's a little violent for you, you could just click the bell. But most people like to smash the bell. I don't know what they have against the bell, but it gets smashed a lot, and it's worth smashing because there's a lot of great content over there at youtube.com/Libsyn. So what we're going to do today is I've got a presentation we're going to walk through, and along the way, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to come back here and see if anybody has any questions. And speaking of questions, the first question, it's like if you go to a Leonard Skinner concert, they're going to scream Freebird? Yeah, that's right, Freebird. If I do a webinar, somebody's going to ask, and they probably already have, hey, is this thing recorded? And the answer is yes. Of course it's recorded. We always record these for you. And so I will be stopping every now and then to come in. I will sip some water, which is always good. And we will see if we have any questions. And if we do, I will answer them if it's pertinent. And if not, we will move on. So let's go over here and start to take a peek at what we're at. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to look at adding your podcast information, how to create an episode, how to promote your episode, and then, like, is this thing working? How to monitor your success. So along the way, if you have a question, you can put it over there in the chat. Just add a little cue right before it, and that way we'll know that that is a question. So if you're ready to have fun, let's jump in here and start playing around. So a couple quick things as we get started. The first one is Tom Hanks, Garth Brooks, Meryl Streep, Jason Sudeikis, who you might know as Ted Lasso, Michelle Obama, Eddie Van Halen, Viola Davis, and Awkwafina. What do these people have in common? This is where I should play the Jeopardy music. The answer is they all have imposter syndrome. That whole, like, you know what? Tom Hanks, I think he was on the Today Show, said, I'm a fraud. He's like, I just keep waiting for people to find out. And, you know, that's the way he just feels. And we all kind of feel that way. And same thing, Garth Brooks, there's a thing on Netflix where he thinks nobody's going to show up because he's playing Central Park. He ended up with almost 1 million people. So if you're in that boat, you're thinking, who's going to listen to me? Plenty of people will. And so let's talk a little bit about equipment. The first thing I always tell people, you don't have to spend $1 million to, sound like $1 million. And the beautiful is this microphone that we're looking at right here is less than $100, and it sounds amazing. So you don't have to spend. It also plugs right into your computer, or if you have an interface, it'll plug into that. Another really popular one, also under $100, is the Audio-Technica ATR 2100. So keep that in mind. And some other gear as we talk, again, you don't have to spend a gazillion dollars on this stuff. So here we go. Zoom PodTrack P4. This thing is the Swiss Army knife of podcasting. Under $200, if you're recording people in the same room with you, or if you have people on Zoom or whatever you're using to do remote recording, you can do that. You can actually plug your phone into it. So if you have somebody that's like, I don't have a computer, well, you can actually record that there. Now, if you want to upgrade a little bit and you don't want to do like a recorder, the Focusrite Vocaster is one of the easiest interfaces ever. You plug your microphone into it, and there's actually a button. You click on it, and as you talk, it sets the level. And then you just plug it into your computer, and you can use tools like Audacity and things like that to record your podcast that way. Now, if you have a bigger budget, this is the Rodecaster Pro. This one goes for about $700. They have a little baby brother that's $500. And again, do I have to buy this? No. But if you have the budget and you're going to have people in the room with you, and this is also great for live streaming. So just a quick look again to give you an idea. But literally, if it's just you talking into a microphone, you can start your podcast today for about $70. Now, we are going to play with Libsyn. So along the way, again, if you have questions, simply put them over in the chat room with a little cue there, and I'll be happy. Like I said, I'll be stopping along the way. And so the first thing we're going to look at is the dashboard. And so when you log into Libsyn, you will see this here in just a second. I clicked the wrong button. There we go. So this is our dashboard. When I click on this, when you first log in, you've got this cool little snapshot of stats, any announcements that are going on at Libsyn are here on the right. You can see your last couple episodes. And also, I want to point out, notice the name of the show, Dave's Test Show. So as we go along today, I'm just playing, and I'll be explaining things. But if you're wondering, like, well, why didn't he actually click publish? Or why didn't it's just a test account that we're playing with today. And so as we scroll down a little further, at the bottom, you have your quick link. So if you ever need your RSS feed or your website, or if you want to make a player, we've got a button here where you can choose from your other episodes. So if you want to just embed the player on your website, it's super easy. You simply click on this and say, hey, I need the code for this. You can pick your color. You can pick the player that you want and what you want to display on that player. And then at the bottom here, you just grab the embed code and copy and paste that on your website. I love our player. It's awesome. And then down here, you'll see just a list of how much space do you have left on your account. So that's the dashboard. It's awesome. And anytime you want to get to that, you'll notice where the navigation is at the top of the screen. So that is our dashboard. And the first thing we're going to get into is creating our podcast. Now, one of the things I want to point out here is when you create your podcast, sometimes we get really stressed out because we want it to be perfect. And that's a really good goal, but we never really, if you aim at perfect and you miss, you land on really, really good. So don't stress out about this. One of my little bumper stickers is your podcast is a recipe. It's not a statue. So when we go in and we add artwork and later we want to change it, yeah, you can change it. When I add my description and later go, ugh, yeah, you can change that. So to do this, we're going to go up in the upper right-hand corner. You'll see this little gear. That is your settings button. And when you click on that, you'll see there are a whole bunch of things here. We're just today going to get you up and going. So we're going to go over to podcast on the left-hand side. And so when I click on that, you'll see here where we have our name. So like right now, it says Dave's Test Show. So if I wanted to change this later to Dave's Real Show, I could do that. I would simply put that in here. And over here, we've got our artwork. Now, this needs to meet Apple stats or requirements, I guess would be a better way of describing that. And that means it needs to be at least 1400 by 1400, all the way up to 3000 by 3000. And what's great about this is you can actually design your artwork right there in Canva. Canva is a free program. Now, they do have a paid version, but I live and breathe Canva. You can make some really great looking artwork. Even if you're not a graphic person, they have some templates and things like that. So you could click on this, go into Canva, design your artwork. And when you click save, it goes right back here into Libsyn. And then here is your description. So I copied a description from Apple. Like this is how Apple describes what you should have in your description. It says, we help, blank, whoever your audience is, do whatever it is they're trying to do so that they can benefit. That's me. The Apple part is the bottom paragraph here. Your description should tell listeners what kind of content you talk about and explain how people can benefit from listening. Anybody here not want to benefit? I'll take some benefit. Yes, I like to benefit. So put that in your description. If you need a little help, think about how you convey the problem you're trying to solve in a way that convinces listeners they should care. That's from Apple. And so I kind of have the line above that. But think about that. I hear so many people that go, I do the interesting show where we interview interesting people. Okay. So I can what? What's the benefit? Oh, so you can be a more critical thinker. So you can save money and retire early. What is the benefit? Be sure to add that in there. So that's again, your title and your description. You can always change these later. And then down here, we have two categories. And these are the categories that are used by Apple and Google and all the other different apps. And you can see when you click on these, there's a really long list. And if you go through this, because somebody's going to say it, because it's kind of true. There are a lot of categories here, but you've picked that really niche show that doesn't fit any of these. And I get that. It happens. So if you go, Dave, none of these really fit, pick the one that's the closest. And in some cases, if you go, well, I really just fit in this one and I have two, you could leave the second one blank, but you might as well find again, well, what's the closest one? The first one was a perfect match. What's the next one? It's just a way to get a little more exposure. And then down here, you have your owner name, which is very similar to the author name. So in this case, I have Dave Jackson, then Elsie Escobar, of course, our community and content manager. That's Elsie up here. And if we go a little further, you have your owner email. So this is something you want to check. So if you have an email like I do, that's, if I'm at a store and they're like, can we have your email address? I have my spam email. I'm like, I know I'm going to get spammed if I give you this. Don't use that here, because from time to time, Apple will send updates and you want to be sure that it's an email that you're actually checking. And then your website URL. If you're a person and the goal is to drive traffic to your website, maybe you're an entrepreneur, maybe you're a small business, and the goal is to drive traffic to your website, then put your website here. Libsyn doesn't know if you have a website or not. So we give you a free website, and it's really simple. It's a great place to listen and a great place to follow. And that's about all it does. So it's great for like Mrs. Johnson's, ninth grade podcast class. Well, they don't have to go through the school board to get a website. They just use their own. But if you have your own website, definitely put it there, because there are going to be apps when people find your listing and it'll have a button right there to website, and boom, when they click that, they go to your website. And if you don't change this, they're going to go to the Libsyn site. And if you have a website, be sure to update that. Then if you know what your release schedule is, you can see there are options here: weekly, every 2 weeks, twice monthly. And if you go, I don't really have a schedule, I have a whenever I can do it schedule, well, then we have that as well. And then third-party content, if you're like, I have no idea what that means, we have these cute little bubbles here. If you click on it, you'll see where it says, if your show includes content created by someone else, this is primarily for music in this case. But in other words, if you don't own the stuff in your podcast, you need to specify that, because, well, that's not good. You want to own the stuff, or at least have the rights to use that thing. So here I could say I have the rights to use that music, or it's just me talking into a microphone. Whichever one is accurate, you would want to use that. Then down here you have, is your show episodic, which means I can listen in whatever order you want. Or maybe it's you've done some sort of fictional story podcast. Well, that would be serial. And that is set up so that the first episode is the first one kind of in the list, because you want them to go first, second, third, and fourth. So if that's the case, you would switch that here. Is your show clean or not? So we have clean or explicit. And it's a joke, but it's not a joke. If you have to ask, the answer is it's explicit. Think about this. If you have a second grader in the car with you on the way to, you're taking them to school, if you would play the show, then it's clean. If it's not, then you probably want to mark it explicit. And then what language are you speaking? That one's kind of self-explanatory. And then episode display limit. In other words, how many episodes do you want to go into these apps? And I think by default it's set to 100. But if you want, let's say you end up with 150 episodes. Well, you could actually set this to 0, and however many episodes you have, those will automatically go into those apps. Now, some apps have limits on how many they will display. I think Apple is 1,000. But if we're just starting today, we got a ways to go before we get to 1,000 downloads. Down here, your copyright, typically the year, and then either the name of your show or your name or whatever you want to put there for the copyright. Then we have a feed locked feature. And this is similar. If you've ever bought a domain, if somebody tries to get your domain, they have to, they have to do the hokey pokey and turn themselves around. There's a lot of little hurdles that they have to jump through. And that's basically what this tool does. And this doesn't happen a lot, but if somebody tries to take your feed and submit it to another host or someplace else, you get an email that says, "Hey, somebody's trying to move your feed." And you can go, "Yeah, I don't think so." So again, not something to really be worried about, but it's there just as a safety. And then lastly, Libsyn is short for liberated syndication. And so one of the things we're always doing when we go to different trade shows, we typically have a table set up with your business card. You can send those to Rob. And we're always trying to help you grow your audience here. And so one of the things we have is our own little directory. And if you want to be included in that, and again, it's just free exposure. Who doesn't want that? You could check that there. Now, if I was doing maybe a private show or something I kind of wanted to stay a little less public, I could uncheck that. But now that we're at the bottom, you'll see there's a save button here in the bottom right-hand corner, and I could click on that. And remember, I can always come back and change this later. So if I go, oh, wait a minute, I wanted to change this. I didn't mention here, we do have a widescreen artwork here. If you're having Libsyn convert your audio into video and submit it to YouTube, that's where that widescreen image comes into play. So you can see here again, we're just playing. So hence I have that says fake there. So all this is for your podcast. You'd click on save and we got there again. If you ever wonder where you're at, we're under settings and podcast. And again, that was under here, under the little gear here in the upper right-hand corner. And we went to podcast and we started off by looking at our dashboard. Now, in a second, we'll talk about making a new episode. But before we do that, I want to pop back over here and see how we're doing in the chat room. And so far, we have a couple questions here. Is a Mac recommended? I have both. Like to my left is a Mac and to my right is a PC. Whichever one you're more comfortable with is the one you use. I've been using a PC since I was a wee lad. And it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. A lot of the stuff you end up doing with podcasting, once you get done recording it, is in the cloud. Libsyn's in the cloud, Canva's in the cloud. There are a lot of AI tools that are in the cloud. So it almost doesn't really matter. It's really whichever one you are comfortable with. I am slowly turning more into a Mac person the more I use my Mac. There are a lot of cool things that just tie together, but no sense going through a learning curve. If you are familiar with a PC and you like your PC, then stick with your PC. It really, in the end, I don't want to say it doesn't matter because again, if you know your PC, then stick with that. Same thing. I typically on a Mac, I don't recommend GarageBand, but I know people like, oh, it's a bummer. I already know it. I'm like, oh, well, then ignore everything I just said. Use GarageBand. I use Audacity if I was on a Mac. Audacity is free, but in the end, which kind of computer? And what's nice about it, with everything kind of being more cloud-based, it used to be you kind of had to have a beefier computer, and that's really not the case if you're doing audio podcast. Now, when we get into video, that's a whole different story because video requires a little beefier machine. But again, you can do video on a PC, you can do video on a Mac. But thank you so much for that question. I deeply appreciate it. I'm going to take a brief sip of water and we're going to move on to how do I actually make a podcast. So back here, we're at our desktop and we're going to make a new episode. So you guessed it, there's a big button and it doesn't matter what page you're on in Libsyn, you'll always have this new button here. And so we're going to talk about making a new episode. So when I click on new, you guessed it, the button says episode. And if I want to make a new episode, yep, that's what I click on. Easy peasy. So here we have our add media file and I'll go ahead and upload one here. I'll click on this and I'll go over to something I had from this week. We'll just upload a file and you'll see when it goes through here, what I want to point out is when it gets over here, it's going to go away. And that's when you panic. And I'm here to tell you, don't panic. It's just getting fired up to do this, which is look at that. You've successfully uploaded your file. So that goes away and then it comes out with a success message. So you're fine when that goes away. Don't panic. And then here, this is what some people call your show notes. It's your your description, it's all the details about your episode. So here, maybe I could say we're promoting a holiday giveaway or holiday something, whatever. So what you want to do here, let me think about this. Win free stuff at the holiday. Oh, typing in front of people is always, hoopla. Now, I'm not sure exactly how to spell hoopla. I'm throwing in an H. Um, you want to have a title that makes people click. Because think about it. First, they're going to see you. So that's where that name comes into play. And for me, a name is great when I can look at somebody and say, hey, I'm doing a show called whatever. What do you think it's about? And if somebody says, well, let's say I do a show called Growing Your Podcast. I'm doing a show called Growing Your Podcast. What do you think it's about? Well, most people will go, duh, growing your podcast? Yes, that's it. I had somebody once that was going to do a show called After the Darkness. And I asked him again, what's your show about? And he said, it's about my life after blindness. And I said, let's use that because After the Darkness sounds like vampires or a band from the 90s or something like that. So he went with Life After Blindness, had his keywords in there too. Well, now we're talking about the title of your episode. And in the same way, we want the title to kind of grab people's attention. We want this to grab their attention so that they click. Our whole goal is to get them to click. And so if we put things like episode 22, that really doesn't make me want to click. Or let's say I put Andy Rogers. Well, if you don't know who Andy Rogers is, you don't want to click that. But if I said, Andy Rogers makes a living with free software, okay, that I might want to click on. So think of that as well. Remember, Apple recommended we really stress on how are people going to benefit. And you want your title to kind of highlight that as well. A lot of people, some people will put their episode number at the beginning. If you're going to do that, I would do something like this, where you abbreviate it, make it short as possible. I personally don't put episode numbers in my title, but that's a personal thing. If I was going to do that, I would put them at the end because this is, if we're real estate, this is beachfront property. And this is what, again, we're using to make people click. The reason I don't put episode numbers in, and again, feel free to do that, is Apple has given you an episode little box over here. In fact, Apple kind of gets upset if you put episode numbers in their title. And so that's why they have this here, because some people will do this. They'll do episode 12, and then over here, I guess I should be doing episode 18. And then over here, you'll see where that pops in for the episode title for Apple, and you could say, oh, Apple doesn't like episode numbers. So you could get that there and then put that up here. If you're doing seasons, you could do that here. And then is this a full, better known as normal episode, or is it a trailer? And if you mark something, I'm assuming it was your trailer as your trailer, then some apps, but not all of them, will actually kind of have that at the top of your listing. And then if it's a bonus episode, you would label it as that. So as we scroll down a little further, there's our good friend explicit again. So if somebody's saying naughty words in this episode, you wouldn't want to mark that. And then over here, you have what we call your show notes, your episode description. And typically you start off with a little paragraph that kind of summarizes the episode. And again, is answering the question. Think about your target audience. They're sitting there, they saw the name of your show, they clicked on the link for your episode, and now you're explaining to them, here's how you're going to benefit. Here's what you can expect in this episode. And if they like that paragraph, then they're going to click on play. Now, if you are like some people that you're like, ugh, typing, I hate it. So I could, in today's show, Andy Rogers explains how he makes a living with free software and random capitalization. Okay. And if you're like, ugh, well, if you had things that you type all the time, this is where snippets come into play. And if I click on snippets, like let's say we're having a Thanksgiving giveaway, I could click on that. Bingo. Sign up for our newsletter, potentially win the big turkey. Pretty neat. And if I had other things here, like, oh, there's She Podcast Live is coming up, or maybe I'm launching my book. I click on that and these automatically come in. You're like, Dave, those are handy. Those are darn fancy. How do I make one of those? Well, if I go to snippets and say, I want to make a new one. Notice where the new button is in the upper right-hand corner, kind of like the way we did the episode. And I could click on this and come back. Let me see here. Did I click? I noticed earlier we had, I see it. This might be because we're recording the screen. I don't know if you guys see it flickering, but I see the form there, but I can't type in it. But in a nutshell, you give it a name, and I see it again. I wonder if that's a weird, I will have to test that anyway. But anyway, we have a tutorial about that. Let me use this as an example. If I go, hey, Dave was having weird issues with his computer. How do I learn about snippets? Well, if I go into the knowledge base and I go, I want to see the snippet thing, I can type in snippets, speed up your episode description, writing snippets. And lo and behold, right there in our knowledge base, it tells you exactly how to make a snippet. So there it is in the description field. And there's the screen we were just almost seeing there. You give it a title and you click on snippets, you make it. So anytime you have a question on anything, that little green, I guess we're going to call it, I'm not sure exactly what I call it, green, I in the bottom right hand corner will get you up and going. Now over on the right, you have an author field, and this typically is you. Now, if you're doing interviews, so let's say in this case, I interviewed Andy Rogers, I would want to type in my name, Dave Jackson, because I'm the author, except it would help, Dave, if you clicked in the right field. There we go. Over here in the author field, much better. And then I would type in Andy Rogers. Now, why is that so important? Because the author field is one of the few fields that's actually searched. So when people go into Apple and they search, it searches for the name of your show, the name of the episode, and the author field. And you're like, it doesn't search this description thing? Not really. And the reason for that is back in the day, people came in and just put all sorts of spammy words in there to the point where Apple just said, yeah, we're not looking at that anymore. Now, this tags field is if you're using, again, Libsyn to convert your audio into a video. And if you're like, how does that work? It's a video, but we just take your artwork. So that's a still image, and then the audio obviously plays. And if you're using that, you could come here. And again, if I just show off these little bubbles, it says, hey, these are used in YouTube. These are the tags that go on over to your YouTube channel. So if you're using that, you could put those here. Now, this category is not the category that we saw earlier in our podcast. That was the one for Apple and Google and all the other different apps. This is a category used by Libsyn. And we saw the player earlier. If I came in and made just a category and said, oh, this one's about, maybe I interview entrepreneurs and we call them warriors, I could go ahead and use this. You could also just make your own category here. And then I can make a player that says, hey, I've done 20 episodes. 11 of those were people that were warriors. I can make a player that says, just show all the episodes about my warriors. It's pretty awesome. So that's what that category is for. And then earlier I mentioned that, hey, if you have your own website, you probably want to point people towards it. So here, by default, this is set to blog page. And what this is saying is, hey, when people are listening to this episode in an app, there'll probably be a link somewhere that says like either more information or website or something like that. Where do you want people to go? And the geeky term for this is the permalink. And so if you leave it set to blog page, it's going to send them to your Libsyn website. And if you're like, well, yeah, I have my own stuff. I want people to hire me as a coach, or I want to sell them my course or whatever it is. Well, then you go custom URL and you would put the full link to your website where the episode is on your website. Now, just a quick tangent on this. Think about this. When you take the description, right, you could actually just highlight this, and obviously we would have more text. I could right click on this and copy it. I could paste it into my website. Let's say I'm using WordPress. Then I can get the code we saw earlier and put the player on your website. Now, those words are going to attract Google because Google likes words. And then when people click on that, they go to your website and they click play on the player. Google is going to go, that's funny. Every time I send something over to Corey's website, they're there for like 13 minutes. That must be really good. And so again, if you're using this to drive traffic to your website, take this content that you're putting in Libsyn, and it's really easy to put it on your website. And then you would just put that URL down here so that when people are listening on the app and they go, oh, more information, boom, now they're on your website. Now they're one click away from signing up for your newsletter, all the other fun things that are going on there at the bottom. This artwork here, you don't have to do this, but some apps, Apple does now, but not all apps will display episodic artwork. So I know Elsie with the feed, if you're not listening to the feed, it's the feed.libsyn.com. They have kind of a template, and then they just update the words to describe what's in that episode. And I think they have the episode number there as well. And again, this is integrated with Canva, or if you've already made it, you could just upload it here. That's your square image. And then this is, again, your wide image that's used when you're doing things with YouTube. If we go down a little further, if you have qualified for advertising, you can come in here and you could say, oh, right here is where I left a spot to put in advertising. And if we go down a little further, here it's saying, hey, this is scheduled. So if you're, I don't know, going out of town for Thanksgiving, you're going over the river and through the woods, you could say, look, I need this to schedule out in a couple weeks. I could click here and say, look, I want this to come out on the 24th or whatever date. If I scroll up a little higher, there's a spot here where you could pick the actual time and you could schedule that. Now, if you go, that's great, but I actually need this to kind of go out now. You could click here and say, no, go ahead and just publish this immediately. One thing, when you do schedule episodes, you'll see this where it says based on a release schedule. There's another option here that says always available. And when you see here media availability, think of that as, when do you want to start tracking the statistics on this episode? And if I say always available, but I'm launching this in 3 weeks, you're going to end up with zeros for your 7-day stats, because the first 7 days, it wasn't even public yet. So if you're going to be scheduling, always set this to, start tracking stats when this is released in 2 weeks. And again, if you're not done with this yet, you could click on save as draft and come back and finish it later, or you could click on publish, and that would actually make it available to all the different apps that you've gone through and submitted for. And we're going to talk about that in a second, about how do I promote this and how do I get some ears and eyes on my podcast. And again, if you do something here and later you go, hey, I'm going to change this later with my description or whatever, and you can always come back and change that. In that case, the publish button will act as a save button. So I'll go ahead for now and just click on save as draft because we're having fun. And you'll notice it's reminding me here that, hey, Dave, you said that you wanted to put a link in here and you didn't put a link. So it's kind of letting me know, hey, that's a silly choice right now. So I'll change that back to blog page, and now I'll click on save and it will be happy. Excellent. And there it is. Hey, we've successfully saved your episode. And if you want to change that later, you can come into episodes and you'll see where this is saved as a draft. So I'm going to run back here and see how we're doing with questions. We do have a question. Nope, we already answered that one, I believe. Yep, we're good to go. Thanks, everyone, by the way, for being here. I really do appreciate it. As a guy that's into education, the one thing that I really, really want are eager students. So thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to attend this. Let's go back and talk about, we made an episode, and once you have an episode, then you can submit your show to Apple and Spotify and all these other places. You can't do this before you have a published episode. I know some people like to line them up and save them as draft, but until they're public, you can't submit your show to be syndicated. And a lot of people like to launch with 3. That's fine. You only need 1. So you can launch with 1, you can launch with 3, you can launch with 10, whatever you want, but you need 1, and you can't submit your show until those are public. And one thing I want to point out here, we're going to go talk about this, but there is a one slide I want to point out here, and that is slide number 9, and that is when you submit your show to Apple, and you'll see this here live in just a second, you have an option to let Libsyn do this for you. And that sounds amazing. Thank you, Libsyn. But you'll notice here, and you'll see these much bigger here in a second, we also give you a fairly long list of why you shouldn't have Libsyn submitted for you. And one of those is you're going to lose access to these stats in Apple Podcasts. You want to submit your show under your Apple ID, and that way you can see how many people are subscribed, where are they at, how far did they listen. That's a really great stat. How far did people listen to my podcast? That can be soul crushing at times, to be honest with you, but it's nice to know that, hey, this content that I'm putting to work here, it's actually resonating with my audience. So let's go see how we do that. And to do this here, we're going to go up to, again, our settings button. And you'll notice that a lot of the things under settings are things you do once and then you may change later. But rather than kind of clutter up the dashboard, you come in here, you do it once, you set it, you forget it, and then you don't have to step over these. So if I go to destinations, you'll see here where I've already submitted a couple here, but I left a couple out. And if we come down here and I wanted to add, let's say, iHeartRadio, you've probably heard of them. It's so simple. See, all these with the word feed, you want to add them all. And I'll show you just how easy it is. If I click on add, you'll see it shows you this thing, RSS feed overrides. You can completely ignore this. The case that you would use is very, 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 very ever seldom. I hope that makes sense. And if I scroll down, I can read my terms of service, and then I would click on approve, and then down here I could click on save. So it was add, approve, save. Then you go to the next one, add, approve, save. The only thing you have to worry about is if something has an asterisk, and we don't have any. So if I go to destinations here, and let's go down, this is the one that's kind of, it just has a few asterisks. If I go to Samsung, so the next time you see somebody fold their phone in half on a commercial, your information, your podcast could be on that phone. And if I click on add, and here you'll see where it says previously used organization. Well, if you don't have one of those, and we don't, you would just leave that blank and then they will send you one. But here, organization name, probably the name of your podcast. Your admin name is going to be probably you, and then your email, and then here's that organization code. And it, again, it even says here, if we click on this, we'll send you one later. And then what's my country? Notice that's an asterisk. And then the RSS feed overrides we'll just wave at as we scroll by. And then again, I can read my terms of service. I would click on approve and click on save. And the beauty of this is, again, it's just add, approve, save. And of course, read your terms of service, but add, approve, save, add, approve, save. And you do this once and then you're done. And you'll see all these that are down here at the bottom will end up here. And I always like to use the analogy of Halloween, which wasn't too long ago. You have your little 9-year-old Spider-Man and he's ready to go get some candy. And so you take him out to the street and you're like, okay, Spider-Man, all these houses that have lights on, they have candy for you. You don't see Spider-Man going, well, maybe that one, probably that one, definitely that one. Nope. No, that kid wants candy. He goes to every single house with candy. Well, it's the same thing here. All these, like down here, Deezer is the Pandora of Europe. They like audio stuff. Ghana and JioSaavn are big in India. And I don't know if you've checked, but there are a lot of people in India. So it takes 5 seconds to add these. Add them, go, there we go, and we're done. And now you can go back to making great content. So those are those destinations. Now, just to go back to this one, when we said the Apple one here, that's your Libsyn Classic feed. And if I go here to next, it's going to ask me here, I want Libsyn to submit my show for me. And it says, if you do not and or cannot get an Apple D. So if you're, I don't know, a 13-year-old kid, no, you probably can't get an Apple ID. If you want to submit your show to Apple Podcasts now, well, it doesn't take that long to do this manually. It literally 20 seconds, if that. Your RSS feed will be submitted via Apple's ID. So what does that mean in English, Dave? It means Libsyn's going to be able to see all those cool stats, but you won't. We don't control your show, but we control access to these extra stats that you can only get in Apple, which is why we're saying, are you sure you want to do this? And the problem is people see this first line, I want Apple to submit my show for me. And they're like, absolutely. And they click on submit. Now, if that happens to you, it's not the end of the world. It does happen, unfortunately. And you just email support and we can go in and remove the duplicate. But normally, what I would say is you would copy this feed. And if you say, hey, no, I'm going to do this myself because I want those cool extra stats, there's your feed. And we have a button right there where you can go into Apple and copy and paste that feed. You do it once. Again, it takes maybe 2 minutes and you're good to go. So again, those were under settings and destinations. And when we come back, I'm going to take a quick break here. We're going to talk about how do I promote this. So I'm going to again come back here, check my, and we have questions. You guys have been busy while I've been talking. Are podcasts always recorded or can they be live? The definition of a podcast, because we're all content creators. YouTube, it's content creators, technically not a podcast. Facebook Live, content creation, technically not a podcast. What makes a podcast, if we're going to get our geek on, is the RSS feed. And if we go back to radio, right, you have 97.5, you take your radio and you turn to 97.5 and this stuff comes out. When you put an RSS feed into what is basically the new radio, your phone, your content comes out. So I record a show live every Saturday. And then I take the audio out of that because I send it to YouTube. There we go, doing my content creation. I take the audio out and I send it to Libsyn, and that goes out as audio only. So we can do video at Libsyn if you want to do video. It's just more expensive because the files are bigger. And YouTube, it's free. Kind of hard to battle with free, but we can do video podcasts. But no, they don't have to be live. But many of them are recorded live, and then you can strip out the audio and do that later because the beauty of podcasts, I can listen to, like my podcast from 2005 is still online. It's time shifted. With radio, right? I've got to tune in at 4:30 to catch, Magic Mike on, 107.5. Well, I don't have to tune in at a time. I can listen anytime I want. With my phone, I can listen anywhere I want. I don't have to be home sitting next to the Victrola, right, on the radio. I can listen wherever I want, whenever I want. That's one of the true powers of podcasting. So, Thomas, thank you for that question. Spotify says requires approval. What do I do to get approval? You basically have to probably, my guess would be you haven't gone into, remember we went to settings and podcast, you have to put in your third-party content. Do I have it or not? And your schedule, even if the schedule is, I don't have one. If that's not it, email support@libsyn.com and they'll be happy to, they can look at your account. And in fact, while we're on that subject, I've seen that a lot today. The first place, if you have a question, is not Facebook, because I've seen a lot of people get really bad advice asking questions in Facebook because there's, 900 podcasters in there. And sometimes you'll actually leave more confused. The people that can look at your account and give you a specific and clear answer is your Libsyn support team. And I'm here to tell you, you're not going to have to wait long to get an answer. So let's see what else we have here. I'm looking for a good mixer. What do you recommend? I actually just recommended one earlier. Well, first of all, if you are just doing a solo show, you don't need a mixer. You grab that Samson Q2U and you plug it in and you're good to go. If I'm doing something with more than one person, then I recommend the Samson Q2U. You can plug multiple mics into it. You can plug it into the computer and record, I don't know, a Zoom call. You can plug your phone in, less than $200, and it's made for podcasting. You can buy a mixer that's made for musicians, but you end up kind of stepping over stuff you don't need. So thank you so much. We're going to now talk about, we just talked about, so far we looked at the dashboard. We made a podcast. We made an episode. We now shared it on the different directories. What about social? So if we go back to sharing my screen, and this is up at the top. And if you're on the $20 plan or higher, you can come into social. And what's great about this, just to show you, if I go here to settings, you could set up your social accounts. You could set up, Twitter and YouTube and LinkedIn. You could set these out. And then after you publish your episode, you can come in here and say, hey, I want to schedule an episode to be publicized on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it this week. I could pick when do I want this to go out, and I could say, hey, today's the 15th. I want to go out on Friday at 2:46. That's fine. And then I type in whatever message I want it to be. Hey, do you like the Beatles? We talk about them today on this episode. And that episode is down here. And so I could say, here's the one where we did that. Now, here, this is one of the things I really love about this. Different social destinations have different requirements for artwork. And we all try to like upload one image, and then sometimes it look great, and other times it look kind of squishy. And now we're telling you, nope, this is the size of the image that Twitter in this case wants. And you can basically upload that right here. You can drag and drop it. And then when somebody clicks on that tweet in this case, where do you want them to go? And I could say, send it to my podcast page. That's basically the Libsyn podcast page, the Libsyn directory. We talked about that earlier. Or I want them to go to my website. And so here again, you put in your website and direct them to where they can listen to that episode. And if I were to click on save, and I said this was for, I think, next week, you'd see it appear on the calendar. And they're kind of color coded. So if it was Facebook, it'd be blue, et cetera, et cetera. And that way you can kind of see how often am I promoting this, and then you'll also be able to see in stats, which is the next thing we're going to look at. Okay, how many clicks did we get from this? What worked, what didn't work? But that's what the social option is here at the top of the screen, is where you can come out and just all from within Libsyn, send these out and schedule them. In our older version of Libsyn, it would publish once. And now we've given you the ability to publish multiple times, because I think the average lifespan of a tweet now is something like 48 seconds or something like that. It's really, really short. So the ability to publish again and again is right there built in. So we've put it on all the apps, the Apples, the Googles, the JioSaavns, the iHearts, the Amazons. And by the way, when you submit your show to Amazon, it also goes to Audible, and you can then say to the woman in the tube, I don't want to say the thing that rhymes with Smalexa. I see it still didn't work. She's smart. Yes, mine's now talking to me, and I'm sorry. That means I triggered yours too. But you could basically ask the woman in the tube, hey, play episode whatever of my show. And in theory, most of the time, she does a really good job of doing that. So especially if you have an older audience, I don't want to look, I have gray hair. I don't want to say that, really old people might be technically challenged, but if you can teach, great grandpa to say, what's her name, play this show, that's pretty cool. And you might actually grow your audience that way. We just did a workshop with the Amazon people. They're awesome. So definitely want to add that as a destination. So is this thing working? Well, I'm going to switch to an actual show here. I mentioned the feed. If you're not listening to the feed, you should be. It's a great show. And it's not just a Libsyn thing. Yes, we talk about new features that are added to Libsyn, but we also talk about things that in some cases we go out and myth bust. With somebody saying, oh, if you do this, and Rob will come in, he'll stand on a soapbox and explain why that's a bunch of hooey, as my grandma used to say. All right, so let's go to stats. And first things first, if you are an Excel nerd, and I say that because I am one, you can download stats here. You'll see that link throughout different areas of the stats page. There's one here. There's another one, I think, down here. So you can do all sorts of further number crunching. But we have, first of all, you have IAB stats. So Libsyn is IAB certified. That is the industry standard. And then we have unique, which is our old system. And IAB is now if you're doing advertising, they're going to say, well, what's your IAB number? So for the most part, leave that set to IAB, unless you really just want to boost your ego with other numbers. But here I can see all time, how many this week, this month, this year, pretty handy. Then here's your last 5 episodes. So if you wanted to say, well, let me compare the first 7 days, I can turn some of this off, which is kind of fun. And then you see like, okay, maybe these ones didn't do quite as good, those episodes. So that's there. If we scroll down a little further, you have, and I love this this is probably my favorite one. You have the totals, but I can also see my first 7-day, my first 30-day, and my first 90. So remember when I was talking about scheduling an episode, how you always wanted that to set to start the stats when this is released, because you have a 7-day column. And if that's a bunch of zeros, you probably forgot to set that if you scheduled it ahead. But if let me click here and we'll go to the next page so we can get some more 90-day stats in here. But you can sort these. You have columns at the top, so you could sort these. It's a great way to go. Is my podcast growing at all? And so I love that section of the stats. Down here, I can look at either daily, I can look at weekly, and I can look at monthly. You can see here, I can set this to really, if I want to just set up my own date range, I could do that. But if I just say, let's look at this year, and I'll say, yep, let's select those dates. And now here I have this set to daily, and you can see you're like, wait, that's only back to September. You have this little slider at the bottom. So if I want to get a wider view here, I can do that. It's really handy. And then let's say you get a spike here and you're like, well, this one's bigger than the other ones. What's going on? What's making my show so unbelievably popular? Well, if you put your mouse over this little circle, you see how it got just a little bigger there? And if I click on that, it shows you, well, on October 24th, here's what happened. And in this case, they released an episode. It got 535 downloads that day. But this is where, when you make great content with great headlines, you can see here's somebody's listing something from 2021. That's that time shiftedness that really comes in handy. And so if I click here on the next page, we'll probably see some here's another one from November. Here's another one from 2021. So in some cases, notice these are 1. So somebody found your show and went, I want this one and that one and that one and that one and that one. And those add up to that daily total. If we go down a little further, here are the downloads by episode. So this is similar to the one we just saw, except it doesn't have the 7, 30, 90. This is just your total. And again, you can sort by these and you can sort by release date. If I ever wanted to, I could click on these. I'll go ahead and do this. If I just want to look at stats for this one episode. So let's say I say, wait, this one has 1,300. Oh, this one has 1,400. Did we do something different here? I can click here and it's the exact same interface. So you don't have to learn another interface. It's the exact same one. The only difference is these are stats for that one episode. It's the exact same thing. I love that about that. So you've got your different, we'll get down here to these. Let me go back up. But just to show you, if you ever want to dig deep into an episode, you can do that. I'm going to go back to the stats at the top. So now we're back to show stats. And if we scroll down here, we'll get to the geographic. If you're on the $20 or higher plan, you can get geographic information. So here you'll see where our top country is the United States and the United Kingdom, et cetera, et cetera. And again, you can download this if you want to. If I click on the United States, you'll see where it'll zoom in and I can see now my states. And let's say I'm a comedian and I'm doing a podcast and I want to go on tour. I might want to click on this markets button, which drills down just a little bit further. And I can now see that. Now, why do we have other? In some cases, this is based on your IP address. And if we can't identify exactly where you're at, you go into the other category. But you can still see that I'm more popular in Los Angeles and then San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera. And then to go back, you just click on the home button and you're good to go. So down here, last in our stats, here you can see user agent is a really fancy name for app. So I can see Apple Podcasts is my number 1, Overcast is number 2. And then over here, those destinations we talked about. So here you can see player.fm, Spotify, in this case, Libsyn has an iPhone app. So you can get those information as well. And then if you are using Libsyn to submit your show to YouTube, that information is here at the bottom. And again, sometimes that can be, you'll see here how many minutes were watched and how long the actual episode was, which sometimes, like, they almost made it halfway through here. So that's there. Again, if you're having Libsyn submit your show to YouTube. And then down here, if you ever want to track how many listeners are coming from my newsletter, it's not something we're going to do a deep dive here in a day, but this here where you can come in and actually make what we call a stat code. And you could put this on your website. You could put it, if you did an episode with a guest, you can make a stat code and make the stat code the name of the guest, and then see how much traffic did that guest send to my podcast. So this is all, again, under stats. And we have tons of tutorials, again, if you want to get into that. I realize we're getting close to wrapping up time. So the last thing I want to talk about, and then we'll look at your questions here and start to wrap up. So one thing when it comes to support is, and we've already seen this, I did this, that eye in the bottom right hand corner is really handy. We have Kelly is our awesome person that does all of our documentation, and she's amazing. And so if you have a question, that's a great place to start. And then the other thing I want to mention here is, and I see this a lot, is let's say I was watching Netflix in the living room. Everything's working fine. I'm having a great time watching this movie. And I'm like, I'm going to finish this in the bedroom. So I go into the bedroom, I get my pillow all set up, I hit Netflix, and I just get that red spinning circle of death, and it doesn't load. Well, is there a problem with Netflix? No, because literally seconds ago, we were watching it in the kitchen or the living room or wherever you're watching Netflix. So we know it's not Netflix, which means it's something in that TV or maybe the Wi-Fi. You're like, Dave, what does this have to do with podcasting? Well, if you release a show in Libsyn, it'll say released. And released really means available. It's like, hey, apps, look, it's a new episode. And until that app comes around and goes, oh, look, Dave has a new episode, and they show it then in their app, it's a case where, hey, I might see my episode in Apple, and then I go to Spotify, and it's not there. Well, in the same way that there was nothing wrong with Netflix because it worked in the living room, there's nothing wrong with Libsyn. It's just that in this case, we're saying Spotify, which right now, for the record, Spotify is a little slow this week. We're not sure what's going on. But if it shows up in one app and not the other, you know Libsyn is working, because if it wasn't working, it wouldn't show up anywhere. So I'm just trying to save you a headache. And of course, if you have any questions, we do have libsyncoaching.com. So if you need a little one-on-one time, you can go over there and sign up for some coaching with me. So we love to do that. And the last thing I want to do is go back and check our questions here. Again, I really thank you for coming back and taking the time out of your day to come listen and learn. So here is a question. This is from Kylie. How come I can't see my podcast on Apple and Spotify, even though they are both approved and they say they've been released to those platforms? That is a great question because there are a couple of things that could be going on there. Number one, I want to make sure your episode is there. I want to make sure your artwork, all that stuff we did in the podcast. So there are a bunch of options here, and I don't want to, I could give you a 10-minute answer. The best thing to do in this case is email support@libsyn.com, because we can go in and check your podcast, we can check your episode, and we can check your listing. The other thing would be, how long ago did you submit your show? Because if you submitted your show for approval at 9:00 this morning, you might not be approved. Apple's pretty quick. Spotify is usually quick, but even giant companies like Apple and Spotify occasionally will have a bad day. Like I said today, Spotify ran. Now, it's not a bad thing. It's just where Spotify, it's usually there in a couple hours. And now it's 4 to 6, maybe hours before that episode shows up. So Kylie, thanks for that question. If you email support@libsyn.com, they'll be happy to dive deep into your account and go, And in some cases, not a lot, but we do have people that we can reach out and go, hey, can you check this, Mr. and Mrs. Spotify, and see what's going on here and make sure you get up and going. So again, thank you so much. This has been recorded. So if you're like, oh, I had to, take a phone call or something like that, we are going to have a replay of this. And don't forget to go to our YouTube channel in December 7th. I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to do a special with myself, Elsie Escobar, Rob Walsh, and Brian the Video Guy, or as you call him, Brian Cuntington. But, and we're going to be talking about our favorite things. So we're going to be talking gear and all sorts of fun stuff. And if you're like, what was that date again? don't worry about the date. Just go over to youtube.com/Libsyn and subscribe, ring the bell, smash the bell, nudge the bell, maybe with that mouse. And that way, when we do go live, you're like, oh, there it is. It's that December 7th thing. They were talking about the favorite podcast things. And you'll be hearing that. And of course, if you go, I'm out of town December 7th, if you subscribe to the channel, you can watch it anytime. So our YouTube channel is amazing. And so last call for questions. I think we hit them all. Nope, no more questions. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. Again, as an educator, the one thing I want is willing students, and the fact that you took the time out of your day, it makes my heart go pitter patter. So I thank you so much for that. And we'll see you again soon on the YouTube channel, here live as well. Thank you so much. And we'll see you again soon. Take care, everybody.